Previously, on Mass Effect 3, we saw how the Mass Effect setting is corrupt to the bone. Today, I'd like to look at how we respond to Mass Effect as a work.
Commander, I've found something you need to see.
What have you got?
A group of Cerberus scientists cut ties and fled. Perhaps they finally realized they were on the wrong side. We don't know what they were researching, but they were among the Elusive Man's top scientists. They could help build the Crucible.
Unless they're indoctrinated, and this is a ruse to get Cerberus close to the Crucible.
I'm not suggesting we trust them fully, but it could be worth investigating.
Has the Alliance tried to make contact with the scientists?
They've been unable to find them, but they're searching. As is Cerberus. I've been monitoring Cerberus communications. I've charted signal frequency from various Cerberus cells by location and cross-referenced known ship movements.
You found them?
There's no way to be certain, but I've got a definite possibility.
Nice work. Put it on the map and I'll give it a look.
It's on the map now, Commander. Thanks.
So today's mission is about Jacob. I have to be honest, I was considering not including this mission in the playthrough at all. Not a lot happens, nothing that important is said. While Samara's mission offers an opening to talk about the subtle inequities of the setting, Jacob's mission is fairly humdrum stuff. So, I'll spend most of it talking about something else instead.
Okay, set us down then get out of here. I need these scientists alive.
There's a couple of reasons this mission doesn't do anything for me. One is that it doesn't really convey anything that meaningful. Cerberus has transformed from a shadow government with ambiguous methods and motives to a fifth column for the Reapers. This mission shows what happened to all the Cerberus personnel that weren't transformed into the husks we saw back on Mars. Remember those? I think this falls flat though, because there's only really 3 Cerberus people that we, the audience, know or care about. There's only 3 Cerberus characters that actually have names and personalities: Jacob, Miranda and the Elusive Man. So this mission to rescue all of these scientists that we've never met, about whom the only thing we know is that they're probably ethically challenged, to put it lightly, through their association with a racist expansionist organisation, well, I don't know, it's a goal that leaves me rather cold. What the mission does do is pick up on the Cerberus plot thread, which weaves throughout Mass Effect 3. While the Genophage and Quarian arcs are quite self-contained, Cerberus kinda shows up all over the place, and that makes it difficult to build and reinforce the Cerberus plot points. Like I implied earlier, by this point in the game, it's easy to have forgotten all about unmasking the Cerberus trooper back on Mars. And that doesn't actually come back into the story until we go to Sanctuary, right at the tail end of the game. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is a very bitty way of telling that story. Mars had quite a lot else going on: the Crucible, the Vermeer survivor, Liara. But this mission with Jacob doesn't. All we find out is that the Elusive Man is doing something bad with the collector-based technology, and he's purging Cerberus of potential opposition. It's like working hard to get a jigsaw piece, only to find out it's just a blue corner section, only showing a blank bit of sky.
Jacob! Oh my god!
I'm alright.
One of the things I want to look at in this video is when Mass Effect 3 doesn't quite work. Now, I know, I sort of did this before, but I want to do it again. Sometimes Mass Effect 3 doesn't work because of bugs or glitches. I think the very first one we saw was probably back on the Citadel, when the shaders went haywire while we were speaking with the Council. Here, Garrus doesn't step forward to acknowledge Jacob. We get a shot of empty air. Last video we had some very clumsy shots and animations. In a moment where Samara powers up her biotics to draw off the Reapers, the camera is aimed squarely at her crotch. A chase scene with Falaire and a cannibal comes off as wooden and stiff. But then, in the same video, we get quite good scenes of Shepard dragging Falaire to safety as banshees slither and slide all over furniture, caress Reela's cheek just before getting blown all to hell, or Samara's slow fall after she kills herself so that she won't have to kill her good daughter. Some of these things are probably unavoidable, the consequence of designing a program made to be played by countless configurations of hardware and software. The council scene has never glitched for me before, but this time, on this computer, with Fraps in the background, it did. I can't hold BioWare particularly accountable for that. Some of these are the unfortunate consequence of a lack of time and money. Perhaps if BioWare had had more time, more than 2 years, these bugs would have been ironed out. Sometimes though, Mass Effect 3 doesn't work not because of bugs or glitches, but because of artistic choices. Jacob's mission was a failure for me, but that doesn't make it an accident or an error. Somebody at BioWare thought it was important to address what happened to Jacob. Maybe it's part of the fan appeasement checklist I've mentioned before, that BioWare needs to show what happens to Jacob because otherwise fans will be upset. Maybe it's part of this idea of wrapping up the series, tying off all the loose plot threads. To be honest, the two explanations aren't all that different, but either way, it's a conscious choice by BioWare to do this.
I promise.
Thank you.
Evacuation in progress. After checking in, please remain in the shuttle loading area to ensure your departure and transportation.
Similarly, take this exchange with Dr. Gavin Archer. We first encountered Archer in the Project Overlord DLC in Mass Effect 2, a Cerberus ploy to control the Geth through connecting Archer's autistic brother, David, to a giant computer. We rescued David twice, first from Project Overlord, and again from Grissom Academy in this game. Now, when Dr. Archer asks after his brother, you can tell him he's alright. Dr. Archer is relieved, his brother is okay, happy days. Or you can choose to keep him in the dark, and you get this hilariously over-the-top reaction. I mean, good God. But this isn't a bug or an error. Someone at BioWare thought this was a good idea. Someone at BioWare wrote this.
From my nightmare. We both know this is the ending I deserve. God be with you, Commander. He was never with me.
Evacuation in progress. Remain calm. Evacuation in progress. Remain calm. Personnel from Project Mia should now be on...
It's a shame this mission doesn't work for me, because I rather like Jacob. I've never played Mass Effect Galaxy, the spin-off game that first introduced Jacob and Miranda, but I have played Mass Effect 2, and I rather liked Jacob in that. Jacob tends to get a lot of stick from fans, and not just the crazy fans that we looked at earlier in the playthrough. There's a long-running unfunny joke in the Something Awful Mass Effect thread that Jacob is so boring and dull that no one can really remember his actual name, so they call him Jason or Joseph or whatever. This is unfair to Jacob, but it does illustrate something important. Jacob is very much an ensemble character. In a cast full of outrageous, almost cartoonish characters, the Ice Queen, the Singing Professor, the Robot Man, Jacob is a very solid, very staid presence. His shtick is to have no shtick. He's straightforward and straight-talking. He plays down his personal concerns so he can be a good crewmate. He's more of a second-in-command to Shepard than your ostensible second-in-command, Miranda. Miranda bubbles over with poorly disguised resentment and her superiority complex, which Shepard must resolve. Jacob doesn't. I think it's very telling that Jacob's main role in the story is to greet each of the new arrivals as they board. Also, consider his loyalty mission coda, in which he engages in a four-way conversation between the Elusive Man, Shepard, Miranda and himself. Jacob's a baseline, an ordinary man by which the other characters can be judged, so his personality tends towards the muted and reserved, which makes it all the more interesting when something does slip out, his dislike of Thane or his bitchy parting comment to Tali. The downside to all this is that when we get a mission that's all about Jacob, this mission, it, again, doesn't quite work. Compared to Samara's mission, in which we finally got to see her Justicar code shatter and break, or Jack's mission, in which we saw her complete a character arc and become a well-adjusted adult. As an ensemble character, Jacob isn't fleshed out enough to carry a mission by himself. This subplot between him and his girlfriend is rather anemic compared to Thane's last hurrah or Grunt doing what he loves best. And while we're on the subject, the few players who might have been interested in Jacob for himself, because they were in a romance with him, are treated to the revelation that Jacob unceremoniously dumped them while Shepard was under arrest. I mean, it's kind of funny for a BioWare NPC to discard the player like that, but it doesn't do Jacob any favours. So I suppose the other purpose of this mission is to tie off Jacob's arc. As with every other Spotlight mission, BioWare writes the focus character out of the story. Jacob gives up the intergalactic heroing, which he isn't particularly great at, to be the family man his father never turned out to be. I just wish that was the focus, rather than these Cerberus scientists that no one ever heard of.
The elusive man became preoccupied with the collectors. I worked in physics. It was a researcher's paradise. I had access to cutting-edge tech and all the personnel I needed. The elusive man spares no expense for technical perfection.
That technical perfection's almost killed me a few times.
It also saved your life. Strange to think about, I would imagine.
Maybe.
But then, life is full of uncomfortable ironies. Isn't everyone's?
I think sometimes there's a conflation of causes and consequences when fans look at Mass Effect 3. And though stuff like Jacob's mission doesn't work for me, I'll always respect an artistic risk. I've mentioned Farscape as one of my favourite shows before, and one of the reasons I like it is that it was brave, it took risks. Sometimes the risks didn't pay off, sometimes they did, but it made the average episode of Farscape far more engaging than, say, any of the Star Treks, most of which gently lull you into a coma well before the title card shows. Glacial pacing, inoffensive concepts, safe and predictable stories, not all of them, some are quite good, very good, but they do play it safe, middle of the road. Anyone can enjoy it, which in a way means no one can almost. But to return to my actual point, sometimes I think BioWare makes an artistic choice with Mass Effect, which maybe doesn't work for fans and promptly gets dismissed as writer error. I am, admittedly, thinking mostly about the ending, which I don't want to discuss before we get to it, but one of the things I am keen to accomplish with these videos is to make the case that BioWare did know what they were doing, and they made these artistic choices deliberately. This is counter to the general perception that BioWare ran out of time and cobbled together an ending from scraps and sellotape, something I think stems from a comment by BioWare writer and incompetent hack Patrick Weeks. Now, there's definitely some truth to that idea, and one of the things I'd like to do when we get to the ending is try to tease out which parts are deliberate choices by BioWare, and which parts are flaws, errors, and unintentional screw-ups. Sometimes it's a bit of both, of course. Take a look at the Tali romance picture for an example of that.
Ask for my protection, my help finding a place to run to. How could I say no?
Who is she to you?
We're together.
And you run this enclave with her? You settling down, Jake?
Yeah, maybe. It's just, if these are our final days, I want to spend them protecting these people. Building a life. Whatever's left of it.
Okay, so one other thing I would like to talk about. How do we fundamentally approach Mass Effect 3? Now, it's been a while since I offended anyone in the thread, so I suppose it's time for me to tell you all again how you're doing things wrong and how to do them properly. Let's talk about entitlement.
What I choose to fight for better mean something to me.
Very shortly after Mass Effect 3's release, 6th of March 2012, there was a massive fan uproar. Those people that hadn't read the script leak played through the game and they did not enjoy the ending. The internet backlash was extreme, as it always is. Twitter campaigns, fan reviews, social media harassment. On the 12th of March, IGN's Colin Moriarty posted a video describing the fan response as mass hysteria and pointed the finger at a sense of gamer entitlement. This caught on as a convenient marker as battle lines were drawn. Those that were unhappy with Mass Effect 3 were whiny and entitled, while those that were happy were sellouts and corporate stooges. A lot of the entitlement debate focuses on how an audience should express criticism. Moriarty specifies the campaigns for BioWare to alter the ending as examples of gamer entitlement. Counter-arguments then focus on how games, as electronic media, are uniquely positioned to receive updates and alterations from designers, so these fan campaigns are actually quite reasonable. There's also an economic element to the defence as well. Mass Effect 3 is a product that ought to fulfill audience expectations, and a failure to do so means the audience is entitled to an exchange or other compensation. I don't think this is the right line of discourse to follow. Moriarty's argument isn't about the practicalities of altering Mass Effect 3, or what form compensation for disgruntled players should take, which isn't BioWare's responsibility. I think the fundamental issue is that the audience shouldn't be having that kind of reaction in the first place. Art is a negotiation. I talk a lot about meaning and what BioWare intends to communicate with Mass Effect 3, but communication is a two-way street, and any meaning I construct will stem, in part, from myself and my own experiences. Again, referring back to my video on intertext, that's meaning that only exists if you know what sci-fi BioWare is referencing. If you haven't seen Star Trek, or Terminator, or War of the Worlds, or Dune, then that communication doesn't happen, and Mass Effect might seem to be an original creation. Now, that reading isn't invalidated by the truth. In 1,000 years, if by some quirk all those other sci-fi stories were destroyed and only Mass Effect remained, then that intertext would be gone. There wouldn't be those other stories to reference, and no one would see that Mass Effect was referencing those other works. The truth would appear to be that Mass Effect was completely original, and perhaps the origin point for the ideas of that future generation of science fiction. But I say anyway, that Mass Effect does refer to these other texts, and that you, the audience, should be aware of these references to other texts, because it provides for a better, more meaningful reading. They're ideas that are only accessible if you consider Mass Effect in this way. And this is what I mean when I suggest that viability is more important than validity. The truth of a given interpretation is secondary to that interpretation's usefulness. People like to make fun of subtext by torturing the story into knots, by suggesting parts of the text symbolize bizarre concepts through convoluted reasoning. But if that's a reading that works for you, then fine. If you can take the idea that Mass Effect is an extended metaphor for the Boer War, as has been suggested previously, and apply it to everyday life, perhaps as a historian of the Boer War, then fantastic. Obviously, if your logic isn't particularly secure, perhaps because you made it up as parody, then you might struggle to do so. But it's not wrong, it's just not very good. When I suggest Mass Effect is the story of how we resolve the madness of Cronus, Asimov's inevitable conflict between man and machine, it isn't intended to supplant a purely literal reading, but to supplement it. There are a multiplicity of readings available for a given text, and it is up to you to choose the readings that are most useful to you. Again, one of the things I hope to achieve with these videos is to present a reading that is particularly interesting, one which may explain some of BioWare's writing choices with the series, one which may not have occurred to everyone. It's not the truth, but it is a truth, and hopefully you found my reasoning so far somewhat convincing. But I digress. Meaning is constructed equally between artist and audience. Some of the counter-arguments against the entitlement slur touch on this when they say that Mass Effect is the player's story. It's the player's choices that make up the game, therefore it should be up to the player how it plays out, and how it ends. I've never found this argument convincing. It seems circular, ill-founded. Mass Effect is both a player-created narrative in which the audience's choices determine the plot, but also somehow fails at being a player-created narrative, because BioWare doesn't incorporate player choices effectively into the story. I mean, can it really be both? Surely it'd be more accurate to say that it just isn't a player-created narrative. And the counter-argument to that is, well, BioWare made us think that our choices did matter. Which just goes to show that there are still people out there that think adverts tell the truth. BioWare's always kept a tight grip on the narrative in Mass Effect. We're not exactly talking emergent gameplay here. But even this is a distraction from what I think is the fundamental divide between the way Moriarty and others approach art and how the Take-Back Mass Effect fans approach art. I think a lot of people approach fiction art in a very romantic way. An artwork is a window into another world. In this secondary world, the conceits of the artwork are true, real. The artwork's purpose is to convey the consequences of this to you, the audience. Through the artwork, you see what happens, what would happen, if the premise of the artwork were true. With such a perspective, the purpose of the artist then is to present this information, to draw the knowledge through the window from the secondary world to our own, as unobtrusively as possible. Ideally, the artist is invisible, a butler that smoothly provides us with the next part of the fiction without being asked or acknowledged. Anything that reveals the hand of the artist too blatantly is grounds for criticism. A deus ex machina is an automatic black mark, because it is too obviously the work of a person progressing or resolving a story, not a plausible occurrence, the natural consequence of events previously displayed. Resolutions need to be set up in advance in order to maintain the meta-conceit of a secondary world independent of our own. The fourth wall must be handled carefully, because that is the window through which we see. The mark of a skilled artist is in maintaining a suspension of disbelief by hiding their tracks, so that everything seems to flow from one to another, usually through adherence to plot structures tried and tested over millennia. The artist is, in essence, a curator of an independent work, and has a responsibility to handle that work carefully and with respect, in order to avoid shattering the illusions of the audience. Helmets on Turians, for instance. As you can guess, this isn't a perspective I share. To me, the artist is integral to the piece. The hidden hand of the artist is a challenge rather than a courtesy. Art is a process which involves both audience and artist in equal measure. Again, an act of communication requires two people. The mark of a skilled artist is in accurately and deftly expressing themselves, their thoughts or ideas, through the medium of the piece. To catch a glimpse of the artist in their work isn't an error. In fact, it should be welcomed. Art is too enmeshed in culture and history for us to pretend that it stands alone, that it holds no significance except to itself. Again, intertext only works if art is part of a wider continuum, an ongoing dialogue across an entire culture. To pretend that art is just a window to escapism is to excise valuable and important meaning.
Double time it. Clear the shuttle bay first so we can bring the door up, then get out to the landing zone.
Lead on.
I don't think it's entitlement to have a negative reaction to a piece. If art is a communication between artist and audience, then the audience has every right to say, I don't like this. I don't think prescriptive criticisms that say art should follow certain principles or meet certain objectives, are particularly useful, but I wouldn't say they're entitled. All criticism is in some way presumptive. Even my analysis, which struggles so hard to be even-handed most of the time, makes its own assumptions about what BioWare wanted to say, about what art should be. Every response, then, is entitled. Where I think the entitlement debate comes from is this question of where the artist belongs in an art piece. I think BioWare and Moriarty, perhaps, feel that the artist's place is in the work. It is BioWare's Mass Effect. It exists to communicate BioWare's ideas. Players, then, have a responsibility to engage with what BioWare is trying to say, to accept Mass Effect for what it is trying to say. The majority of fans, meanwhile, do not think BioWare belongs in the secondary world of Mass Effect. Mass Effect is a window into another world, an escapist fantasy. BioWare's role is to keep the window open and clear, so that the audience may enjoy the view. Certain artistic choices then, such as the decision to close the window, to wrap up individual character arcs or irreversibly alter the setting, are forbidden, a breach of etiquette. I think it's this dissonance in views that leads to accusations of entitlement. When Moriarty decries the fans as entitled, what I think he's trying to express is that the fans are not allowing this room for BioWare to make artistic choices. They are demanding BioWare retreat to the background and put their ideas to one side so that the audience may have free run of the piece. Essentially, BioWare should not be allowed to communicate their ideas to the audience, but instead should sit back and allow the audience to communicate their ideas to BioWare. I think there's definitely a place for the fan response. The description of fans as entitled is accurate, in that the fans are entitled to one half of the communication taking place. They have every right to dislike or reject a work, to criticise it. God knows I've done the same, even when, especially when, I'm pretending to be impartial and objective. Where the error lies is in ignoring what BioWare is trying to say in favour of applying your own preconceptions. It's a silly space opera. It's a 3-act play. They shouldn't kill off characters. They shouldn't end the setting. And castigating BioWare when they don't say what you expected them to say, or, more accurately, when they try to say anything at all. That is entitlement, and not the good kind.
Jacob, landing area cleared.
This place is crawling. Bringing the shuttle to you.
Roger that.
Out by the skin of our teeth again, hey, Shepard?
Nice to see you back in action.
Yeah, feels good.
I was afraid we wouldn't get anyone out alive. But because of you, we got almost everyone. Thank you.
And now there's something you could do for me. I need your help against the Reapers.
Without a doubt. I'm at your service. And I'm sure you can count on the others as well.
You too, Jacob. I need you.
Of course, but I wouldn't mind staying with these folks.
You don't want to join the team on the Normandy?
I'm torn, Shepard, but looking out for these families is important to me. It's where I'm at right now. I hope you can see that.
Keep them safe, then. The Alliance needs that Crucible.
You got it.
All right. Report to Admiral Hackett for your assignment.
You know, Commander, I've never met anyone like you. Just feel better knowing you're on our side.
Thanks.
Shepard, when this mess is over, drinks are on me. Be safe out there.
Hackett here.
I'm sending you a large team of scientists.
I have the dossier.
They're all Cerberus defectors. Keep them safe.
Will do, and I'll put them straight to work on the Crucible.
Jacob Taylor is with them and is already working to find a place for the families.
He'll be a valuable asset as well. Snagging Dr. Cole from the elusive man is a coup. Having her on our side could be a huge win for us.
The sooner we can get the Crucible finished, the better I'll feel.
I'm with you.
Shepard out.